He had epilepsy. He had a rare genetic disorder that caused him to have seizures. It doesn't even have a name. It was a Friday. And during his breakfast, he choked on his pancake. I called 911. I tried to do CPR. Firefighters came. They let me ride in the ambulance and I went with him to the hospital. We get to the hospital. He started having a seizure. He ended up having that seizure for 24 hours. They told us that if he does wake up, he would have severe brain damage. The doctor said, somebody is going to talk to you about organ donation. They let us know that they had found a placement for his heart. We were somebody else's miracle. It doesn't make it feel better, but it's kind of like...
This is the Lost Child podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. We have a guest with us here today, and she's going to share a little bit about her story. Let's dive into the podcast.
Thank you, Andrea, for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. You taking the time to even come on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Just to jump right in, can you tell us the name of your child that ended up passing away?
Yes. His name is Samuel Lovio Perez Jr.
Wow.
We call him Sammy.
Was it always Sammy from the beginning?
From the beginning, because my husband's Sam. And so we got Sammy or baby Sammy, or the baby is really what we called him most of the time.
Okay.
Actually, he had lots of nicknames from lots of different people. Baby brother. I even had some of my nieces would call him baby brother because that's how often we were referring to him as that. My dad would call him Sumo Sammy because he was super chunky.
Wow.
And Little Prince and just all sorts of sweet little nicknames. But Sammy is what we called him.
Yeah. And where did he fall in line with, I assume you have other children. Do you have other children? And where did he kind of fall in line?
He's the third child and our only boy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so he passed away before his baby sister was born, but we had the two girls and then we had him. They're all about 3 years apart. And then 3 years later we had Rainey. So he just still fits right into that lineup.
Do you have any special memories that you like to go to about Sammy?
Yes. I do. I have lots.
This one. Yes.
He had epilepsy. He had a rare genetic disorder that caused him to have seizures. From the day he was born, he had seizures, and he had a developmental delay, which I'm pretty sure was from the medication more than it was from the seizures, but it could have been a combination of both. And so he was very sleepy all the time and just kind of would lay on you. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted a hug or if you wanted just a snuggle, he was the one to snuggle, and he would snuggle anybody. If you put your arms out to him, he would go to you, kind of anyway, he loved everybody. So he that is what my go-to memories is, just holding him. He also had the sweetest little squeal. He never learned to talk, but he was very squeaky and squeal and giggled all the time, just happy boy, and just fun. He really liked music, or my husband would play the guitar and he would want to get to the guitar. And that was actually kind of he didn't start crawling until 11 months. And it was kind of his motivation to crawl was to be able to get to the guitar. Oh, wow. Which was we have videos of him crawling all the way across the floor. He could hardly even hold his head up, but he was getting himself all the way to the other side of the room. Just those little memories.
How did he get along with your daughters?
Oh, he loved them. And they adored him too. He was everybody's baby. He wanted to be, I think Connie, my oldest, would make him laugh all the time. And he just would giggle at her, and he loved them and they loved him. They just wanted to be with each other all the time. Really sweet.
And for context, how long did he live? How old was he when he died?
Passed away at 15 months.
At 15 months. Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
And was that kind of an expected thing or completely unexpected?
No. So his genetic disorder, a lot of children do die young. But he was actually on the higher functioning end of the spectrum. Okay. And so there are some people, one that I know, she's in her 40s. And so they can have a long lifespan. It's very rare. So we don't know if there's more people out there, but, so he kind of seemed to be on that trend. And so his death was actually really unexpected and, shocking and traumatic. It was pretty Pretty bad.
Do you want to go into that a little bit and just tell us from your perspective kind of how he ended up passing away?
Yes.
And what genetic disorder did he have?
So he has, it doesn't even have a name. So the disorder doesn't have a name, but the gene mutation is from the TBC1D24 gene.
Okay.
And I have a mutation and my husband has a mutation, and we both gave Sammy our mutations, and it resulted in the disorder.
Okay.
And when he was diagnosed with it, which wasn't until he was like 9 months before we had the genetic results back.
Okay.
So he like had the epilepsy from birth, but we didn't know what was causing it until.
And he potentially seized like his first day alive.
We didn't know. So he had all sorts of different types of seizures that even doctors were like that's weird.
Yeah.
Really?
And after talking to other, it's just part of the disorder. So on the day that he was born, he was doing this really weird like shriek, and his whole body would like tense up, and he'd like do this shriek while he would tense up. And I was like, that's a weird cry. And they're like, oh, he's just crying. Like maybe his tummy hurts or whatever. He swallowed amniotic fluid. And so maybe he's just, gassy or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but I heard him cry. This doesn't sound like the cry that he was just doing before. It was like a weird shriek. And so that was weird from like the day he was born. And then at about 4 weeks, he started doing this weird like thing with his eyes where it was just like, how babies, when they move their eyes, their head moves too.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'd just be like this. And they're like, oh, wow, he's just like busy. He's looking at things. And I was like, I don't think he's controlling his eyes. Like, I think his eyes are going without him trying to, because there'd be times he'd be trying to look back at me and couldn't. So I was trying to like Google it to be like, what is this?
Yeah.
Because the doctors were like, it's just a baby and babies do weird things. And I was like, I've had lots of experience with babies, and this is really weird and different, but okay. So I tried to Google it, and I kept coming up with nystagmus, which is not anything like what he was doing. And then like every once in a while it would pop up and say seizures in babies. But then when you'd look into it, it'd be like twitchy limbs or whatever. And I was like, that's not it either. So it was really weird. But because I had done that, research, I was able to catch it when he did start having a twitchy limb. And it was his hand, and it was just like twitchy. And so then I called the doctor, because that's what it says to do online. And I was like, his hand has been shaking for 20 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
And they were like, yeah, that's not normal. Time it and have him come in. And so we met with the pediatrician. I showed her the video because I recorded it, and she's like, yeah, that's not normal. So they put us to a neurologist and showed the neurologist, and the neurologist is like, yeah, that's not normal. But it also didn't look like a seizure because he was awake and he was alert and he was responsive. But he just had this like twitchy limb. And so then it started happening. It would be his hand or his foot. And the neurologist told us to, if it gets worse, to go to the emergency room where she was on call. And so she, at about 2 months, or almost 2 months, just a little after 2 months, we were at the store, and I remember having to rush because my kindergartner was going to get off the bus, and we had to be back to get her off the bus. And we took too long at the store. I've got my cart full. I'm wearing Sammy because he had low tone. So even at like 2 months, he was having a hard time holding his head up. So I had him like in a sling. And the lady was like, oh, wow, he's so interested in the lights. And so I looked down at him, and he's like his face is blank almost. He's looking at the lights, and he's blinking really fast, and he's got this goofy smile on, but it was like he was not there. Not there.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, oh my gosh. And I grabbed his feet, and his feet were twitching, both of them.
Oh my goodness.
And before that, it had just been one limb at a time. So it was both of them. By the time I got to the car, it was his whole body was shaking, but he was still awake. And so from my understanding of seizures at that point was he was awake, so it couldn't be a seizure. And so I was like confused at what to do. We got home, we got my kindergartner off the bus. We go into the house, and I'm like breastfeeding him, trying to like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And my husband's like, the doctor told you to go to the hospital if it gets worse. This is worse. And I was like, oh, okay. So I load all my kids in the car, and we drive to the hospital, and it stopped on the way there.
Okay.
but we went anyway, and we were able to get, we stayed the night in the hospital. He was able to get the EEG, where they put the things on the head, and we were there for 3 days, and he did not have the seizure until like an hour before they were going to take the probes off. Yeah. And so finally, and it wasn't his typical seizure. It wasn't like the shaking or the twitching. It was like a when he was born, that tensing of the body. He wasn't screaming, but he would tense his body.
Okay.
And that's what registered as a seizure on the EEG. And so then I was able to, he had like 7 of them that hour before we took it off.
Wow.
And so she was like, oh, okay, here's the spikes. Here's the seizures right here. So we finally got the diagnosis at 2 months, put him on medication. Nothing changed. Put him on a different, nothing changed. And so he was, by 4 months, they called it intractable epilepsy, which just means that he's not responding to medication.
Okay.
And so he, intractable? Anyway, I don't remember how to say, but he wasn't responding to the medication. So his seizures were happening often, and we'd have a seizure at least once a week. The seizures changed though. So he was having those stiffening. He stopped having those altogether and was just having the twitchy episodes. But when he would have the twitchy episode, it would last an hour.
Oh my.
It never stopped with the rescue. We always had to go to the hospital and get like a load of phenobarb. Like we were becoming friends with the people at the hospital. I knew which, phlebotomist to ask for the IV. It was not a fun experience, very stressful, very, anyway, so at 9 months, we got the genetic testing back, and that's where we found out it was,
Is the genetic testing something that you always try to do, or is it just, what did you come up with that? For me,
they decided to do, I actually have epilepsy. And my epilepsy is unrelated to his. So a lot of people have seizures. And if you have, I think it's 2 or more that are unprovoked, then you're considered to have epilepsy. And I've had 3 seizures that they don't know why. And so I have this on me. So they're like, okay, maybe it's something genetic, even though his were different than mine. So it was actually at 4 months that they took the blood tests, but there's only one lab in Arizona that tests for all of the seizure disorders. And so it took a long time for those results to come back. We didn't get to know until like September of that year. And it didn't change anything. It gave us some more terms. So the types of seizures that he had, or the kind of like the new diagnosis was MMPSI, which is migrating something, partial epilepsy, which just means like one part of your brain kind of short circuits, and that's what's causing the hand to twitch because it's from this part.
Which is why he would still be potentially awake while he was doing it.
Exactly. Because it's just partial instead of like the whole brain. The whole brain. It's just like one part of it. And because it was migrating, so it'd be this part or this part or this part or this part.
Yeah.
Surgery is not an option because it's not just one part of the brain that you can remove.
The whole brain, but not at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was like one of those things where like there's nothing that we can do about it, and we can just keep trying to do different medications. We did have success, and I can't remember what the medication was, but we did have success for a month on a medication, but it changed his whole personality. Like he didn't have seizures for 30 days, and we're like, this is amazing. But he also like was starting to sit up, and he lost that ability altogether. He was angry like all the time. Like my happy boy was just angry and sad. And so we're like, I think he's having negative side effects. And they're like, oh, it's from the Keppra. It's Keppra rage. And I was like, yeah, but he was on Keppra before and didn't have this problem. It's this new medicine. So they took him off the new medicine, and the seizures immediately came back.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast.
And so we're like, okay, that medicine worked, but like the side effect wasn't really.
Yeah, risk versus benefit.
Yeah, because it like he was even more floppy than what he was before. It was just really wasn't great. So then we just kind of kept going with life. I became a teacher that year. So he was at daycare, and I think that was kind of a blessing because it was an opportunity for me to not have to be his sole provider, like caregiver. Like I was able to put my mind on other things because he just consumed all of my life. We still were going to the emergency room at least once a week. And it was was really, really hard.
How did that work at daycare?
So it was
the seizures?
she lived the lady that was doing daycare, she lived in the neighborhood by where I worked. And so she would just call me and say, he's having a seizure. And I'd come and I'd give him the rescue and we'd wait 5 minutes. And if the rescue didn't kick in 5 minutes, then we're like, let's go. Because anything longer than 5 minutes, he was going to last an hour or
and your
more.
School that you worked at was okay with that whole thing?
They were okay. Like, they weren't telling me I couldn't go, right? They were like, yes, your family comes first, of course. But it had like, it was not easy to get a sub, and it made it really hard for my class, for their teacher to be gone a lot. So that was kind of hard. And made that whole school year stressful. And if I were to do it again, I wouldn't work. Like I would have just stayed home, I think. But I do think that I needed the break. I needed the break from him, even though the break was causing me a different type of stress. So I don't know, in the future, I would have picked a different career than teaching while my son was sick.
Yeah.
But by the November, so when he was 11 months, he started to crawl. And we were like amazed because we were like, he could hardly even hold his head up and look at him crawling. But it was like that motivation of like being able to get to the things that he wanted. He had low tone, which just kind of like he couldn't hold his head up. His body would slump over sometimes. Sometimes he had better tone some days than others. And this, for the TBC1D24 disorders, that's a common thing. They get low tone days and they can't do much, but he was able to crawl. He did learn how to sit. He was starting to pull himself up to standing. He never learned how to talk, but he was still making slow progress otherwise. He, when he was 15 months, COVID had started. So we all went on spring break and then we were never allowed to go back. And so it was March 27th, 2020. And it was a Friday and we got up and had breakfast. And because of his low tone during his breakfast, he choked on his pancake. I called 911. I tried to do CPR. I couldn't get the air to go through. You could hear it trying to move the food down, but it was stuck in there. Like there was no getting it out. Firefighters came. They got the pancake out, and they were doing CPR. I left my older children with the police officers while we were waiting for my mom to come to take over before my husband could come home from work because my mom was closer. But so then I'm like, do I leave my children and ride with the ambulance? They let me ride in the ambulance, and I went with him to the hospital. On the way to the hospital in the ambulance, I heard them say rates have been restored. Like his heartbeat had come back while we were in the hospital or in the ambulance. And so then I was like, okay, that's okay. And then the guy driving was really sweet and like he's like, you hear that? The rates are back. He's doing great. We're going to be okay. We get to the hospital. It's COVID, right? Can't really be anywhere. So I'm like, kind of like not even in a waiting room, but kind of like in the entryway where they wheeled him in. And like, there's like a little chair there. I was sitting, my husband came, but just to drop stuff off because they wouldn't let him come in. And so I was like, I could only one parent was allowed. So I was there with him. They worked on him for a little bit. They got him intubated, took him up into the PICU. And when he was settled up there, then they let Sam come in for a little bit, but he was not allowed to stay. And while he was there, he started having a seizure but because his seizures were not recognized by all doctors as seizures, because they're weird and look different, he was not sure. He was like, I don't think that's a seizure. And we're like, it is. And the nurse like pushed for, us to give him medication for it. And I think they did, but it didn't work. And so he ended up having that seizure for 24 hours.
Oh my
gosh. And and so, but my husband wasn't allowed to stay. So then it was just me with him for this seizure for 24 hours. And then it was calm after that. He was kind of settled. He was sedated because they wanted his body to have some time to recover. And so then it was like, what am I supposed to do now? Because Sam can't come in. It's just me. I can't go out. I'm not allowed to leave either because of COVID. And so I had my computer. I worked. I watched, Tiger King and tried to figure out what to do to fill my time. On the Sunday, we decided to have a family fast where we go without eating for the day. And it was my husband and I, we don't go to the same churches. But that was something that both of our families believed in and we were able to do together. And so we all fasted on that Sunday. On the Monday, they told us that after they did some images, they told us that if he does wake up, he would have severe brain damage. Whether it was due to the lack of oxygen or the seizure that lasted 24 hours or both, it was going to be severe brain damage. On the Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning, his blood pressure dropped significantly to where they were like everybody came rushing in and they were trying to work on him. And then they were asking me questions that I didn't know how to answer because I was by myself. I didn't have my husband. And they were like, do you want to put him on medicine to fix his blood pressure? And I was like, I don't know. You're the doctors, you're supposed to do. And she's like, if we put him on it, it's hard to come off. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And so I was like, yes, right. Sam's not here. He's we need, anyway. So that day, later in the day, after we got some sleep, they came in and they said, we're pretty sure that he's brain dead now.
Because he essentially went into a coma, yes? Or
they had him sedated. So
okay.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah. So he was, most of the time, because they had him on a breathing machine, most of the time we were there until that Wednesday, he was breathing over the machine. So he had a machine that could breathe for him, but he was doing the breathing on his own up until Wednesday.
Okay.
And so I don't know if something with the blood pressure dropping or whatever. And I personally think I know why it happened, the time frame that it did. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But so because of that, we were able to get my husband was able to come finally to the hospital, even though we were not allowed to have two. The nurses literally snuck him in. They made it seem like I was not there so they could sneak him in. And then we just told us neither of you can leave. You can only stay here because they were pretty sure. What they do when it's suspected that there's brain death, they do several tests by one neurologist. And then 2 days later or 3 days later, they'll do another set of tests by another neurologist. And that's when they call it. So Wednesday we came in, or my husband came in. We also were able to get my dad, who in our church, he carries the priesthood and he does priesthood blessings. And so the way we were able to get him to come in and give my son a blessing was sometimes people have their pastors or whatever come in for last rites. So it was that type of a religious figure is allowed to come in.
Yeah.
It just happened.
They have a minister exemption thing or whatever.
Exactly.
It is. Yeah.
So even though it was my dad and his, he was able to come in, but nobody else was allowed to come in. So he came in and gave him a blessing. And that's kind of when I knew that he was gone. There was no whatever. But my husband is, in their church, we all believe in miracles. He was adamant that we were going to have a miracle, that this doctor's saying he's dead, but that's not the truth. And so he came in and then, we spent literally the next 2 days, just praying for him to wake up, just wake up, just start breathing over the machine again. Right. Just wake up. And so then, the Thursday night, they scooched his little body over a little bit so I could actually sleep on the bed with him for that last night. And then Friday morning, the second neurologist came in and did the tests and he was brain dead. And then almost immediately after that, the doctor said, somebody is going to talk to you about organ donation. And, but so she's so don't make any decisions right now. Just wait until somebody comes to talk to you. And so he stayed hooked up to the machines. My husband went out and made all the terrible, terrible phone calls. I made prints of his hands and his feet in clay and on sparkly paper, and they asked me if we should cut his hair, and I said no, because we had never cut his hair. And I was like, wait, we can't cut his hair now. Like, we've just left it long. So we didn't do that. And then the guy came and talked to us about organ donation, which I have a brother who passed away. And I remember hearing all the cool stories about, because he was an organ donor. And so then my sister-in-law was getting letters of like, this lady over here is getting parts of his eye, so now she can see, and like those types of things. And so I do believe that is a blessing. So I said, yes, we could, bless you.
Thanks.
We could donate his organs. And then we left the hospital with my baby hooked up to the machines, and I hadn't been out of the hospital in a week. And so I remember feeling like it was really bright. We could have stayed until after he did the surgeries, but my husband was like, I need to go home. Like, we just need to go. And I didn't want to be alone at the hospital anymore.
Yeah.
So we left him. And I think if I were to do it over again, I would have stayed. And then that Sunday, they let us know that they had found a placement for his heart. And that is really what I believe, like, why he survived a week after the incident, was so that match could line up perfectly. We were somebody else's miracle, which I think is really what makes it, like, gives it a purpose. I don't know. It doesn't make it feel better, but it's kind of like, okay, at least somebody else got a miracle out of our devastation.
From my perspective, I think it's sometimes it almost makes it more difficult. Yeah. Because you, like you said, you're the miracle for somebody else.
Exactly.
But why didn't you get the miracle?
Exactly. And it really, that's what I was thinking. Like, we didn't get our miracle. A miracle happened either way. We were praying for a miracle, and a miracle happened.
Just not the miracle you
Just
wanted.
not the miracle we were wanting and asking for. And I was really worried because my husband's faith is pretty new. It's not new now, but at that point it was fresh and new. And he was so sure that we were going to get the miracle that he washed all the blankets at the house, the ones that would smell like him. So when we came home, we didn't have anything that smelled like him, because he was so sure we were going to be able to bring him home. And so it was like he was positive it was going to happen, and then it didn't happen. And I was scared that would break his faith a little bit. And that would be really hard to not be on the same page after.
Yeah.
And so but I was really impressed with him when he made the announcement to our families about the organ donations, and how he was the one who brought it up, that we got to be somebody else's miracle, and that we honestly were probably the best in our family, spiritual wise, to have that experience, and to make it through. But it was, I don't know, it was still the worst thing to ever happen, even though, like, at that time we were able to make it. I think the worst thing, because then we came home and I had my, my 6-year-old, maybe she was 7, my 4-year-old, and I had to tell them my brother's brain wasn't working anymore and he doesn't get to come home. And they had already gone through his whole life. Like, we were going to the emergency room often. So they were just thinking this was another emergency room thing, and brother was going to come back home. And that was really, I think the worst part was having to be the one to tell my children their brother's not coming back. Anyway, yeah, it was
Sorry.
It was an experience.
Yeah, I agree with Camille. I'm sorry.
It is really hard to tell the other siblings.
And to relate a little bit to that was our first thing we did when we got home.
Yeah.
Is they were at Camille's parents' house, and it wasn't go in and hug people, and it was just like, here, we need to go in a room.
Yeah.
We're going to just pull the Band-Aid off and let you know.
Yep.
Because they had been praying too. Right.
And as much as, like, I was worried about my husband's faith, like, how do I explain to my 6-year-old, my 7-year-old, how do you explain that it's okay, right? I'm hurting. I'm broken. I am trying to keep it together, but I had to keep it together so that way they couldn't fall apart. And they were very, very, very sad because they loved their brother, of course.
Yeah.
That was really the hardest part. And then having to still now, right? You know, being available to my children when they're sad and devastated. And also like, it's such a weird, because I always keep them in the count, right? How many children do you have? I have 4, but they see me with my 3 girls. So then I have to explain to them, well, my son's not here. And my kids have to do that. Do you have any brothers and sisters? Yes, I have a brother, but he died. And they don't want to talk about it. Like they don't, the way my daughter says it, she's like, it's nobody else's business. She doesn't want to share it with her friends because people look at her as sad, or they say, what happened? And then they have to explain it. And that's hard.
We've had a lot of times where parents will then look at us like, is this true? Or is this like a made up story? You know, like just at the playground or something.
Right.
And Deidre will be like, oh yeah, my sister died.
Yeah.
And then they'll look at us like, and we're like, yeah, no, it's real.
Yep.
It happened.
That happened. Yep. Yeah. It's sad. It's hard. But we also make it a point because like they don't want to talk about him. But so we make it a little bit of an extra point to have him everywhere. Put his pictures up. We keep his things out. We have blankets made. We had a little teddy bear made, and just kind of when they're too sad, they can use the blanket or they can use the bear, and they can snuggle close and know that. And it's hard too. I was his main caregiver, right? I was not because like Sam wasn't there, but he was working so we could pay for all the medical bills and all the things that we had to do. But he was like really just my koala baby on me all the time. I wore him everywhere, and we were always together. I was in charge of the medicines and the things. And I went from being so busy with him to being nothing.
That's hard.
Now there's nothing. How come I slept all night last night? How come I don't have to give somebody medicine this morning, or I'm not having to. It was a really empty feeling. And then it was also COVID. So then we didn't have, like, we had our families come over, but we didn't, like, our friends couldn't come over, and like the service that your community usually does for you couldn't happen in the same way, which was fine because we wanted to be alone. So that was okay. But like, you know, there was no, it was also kind of nice because there was no like church to go to on Sunday. Like, we didn't have to leave the house to go anywhere. I could just stay home and be sad. But also that meant that we were just staying home and being sad. Like, there was no distractions. There was just how our life is different now.
You were just kind of stuck with your own thoughts.
Yeah.
On a heavier scale than what,
right,
quote unquote, normal life would have been.
Exactly. So it was kind of a blessing that I didn't have to go back to normal life, but then also kind of like
not at the same time.
Not at the same time. Just kind of a weird. And then like even for the funeral, we weren't allowed to have it at the church building. We had to have it at the cemetery. And then we were limited to the number of people who were allowed to come. And my family's huge, and my husband's family's huge. And like, how do we limit who can come? So we had it recorded, and then like, to be the one to have to plan your son's funeral. Like, we're not supposed to plan our children's funerals. We were very, very blessed though. In like, my sister-in-law was able to find a plot for a pretty good price, and in the same cemetery that my brother was buried in. I have a sister who passed away also. So they're both buried there. And so it's all like at the same place. And then my cousin makes coffins out of wood. So he just went right to work and made him the tiniest little coffin that I've ever seen in my life. And they shouldn't make coffins that small. But like blessings like those, like even though we couldn't be together, we were being served, carried,
There's another way you can help support the podcast. Buy one of these awesome t-shirts. We have these Shine Bright shirts, special edition for the Lost Child podcast. We have many different sizes of shirts, including a men's shirt and a women's shirt and a youth shirt. You can get your own, so visit the video description or podcast description, and there'll be a link to our Shopify store. So hurry quick, select a shirt size that fits best for you. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
I have a group of friends of friends in my neighborhood, my community, and they went because they weren't part of the number that was going to be at the cemetery, but they went early and decorated the. They had gathered cards from people who knew Sammy and just like all their memories and stuff, and they put them on cards, and then they like tied the cards around the canopies with purple ribbon. Purple represents epilepsy awareness.
Oh, wow.
And so there was like purple ribbons everywhere, purple balloons, and these sweet note cards. And it was just the most beautiful thing. And then, everything was virtual at that point. So we were able to broadcast it, and people who couldn't come to the funeral could still watch it. And it's beautiful. It's crazy how you can see beauty in all the darkness.
Yeah.
But we definitely were carried. Like it took a while before the big crash came because of how much we were being served and carried during that time. And then I felt like every time, because you were telling me about this picture, I felt like every time a crash was about to come, we'd receive a beautiful piece of art in the mail or bracelets or, like you've got several. We've also received several art pieces that people drew of Sammy specifically, or Sammy with Jesus, or Sammy with our family, so he can be part of the count always. Or so just kind of just really blessed with people who are remembering us. So every time the crash was about to happen, we'd receive something else, and we'd remember, okay, they're still thinking of us, they're still supporting us, they're still loving us.
So with it being COVID times and like you weren't going to church, you're really going out anywhere, how were you coping with stuff?
It was really, really hard. We built a garden.
Oh, that's awesome.
So Home Depot was still open. So we went and picked out a bunch of flowers, and we called it our Sammy garden. And I spent almost every Saturday at the cemetery by myself. I'm trying to think what else we did. It was nice to have my husband with me all the time. Like that was, I think I would not have been able to make it through if I didn't have him being there and aware of me. And the other way around, like me being like, one of us could be the parent while the other one was kind of grieving or having a moment. We did a lot of, so hummingbirds.
Yeah.
I have a weird obsession with pennies from heaven. My brother passed away, and at his funeral, a squirrel came right up to us, and my sister-in-law made a joke of, your brother sent that. And I was like, 100% he sent that. Like, why else would a squirrel, like there's a whole cemetery where there's no people and it's coming up to where we all are. Mm-hmm. It was the funniest thing. And so like I associate, when I see squirrels, it's like my brother sending them to me. When my sister passed away, which was 6 months after my brother passed away.
Oh my goodness.
And they passed away when they were adults? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. As adults. And then they were both like sudden and random, and pointless. Like it's all dumb. I don't like any of it. But at my sister's funeral, I had never seen so many dragonflies ever. Like we were surrounded by dragonflies, which is totally her. Like I could see her and relate her to dragonflies.
Okay.
Personality wise or whatever. And so then when Sammy died, I was like, all right, where's my sign? Where's my penny from heaven? And then I got nothing. And so I went to the cemetery every week, waiting, and getting kind of frustrated that I wasn't getting anything. And one time I went, and my sister-in-law came with her kids, and the cemetery is like a big park. So the kids are just running around and playing. And we look up, and there is literally a hummingbird like dancing around all of our children. And so my sister-in-law is like, there he is. There's Sammy. And then literally since then, we have seen or heard hummingbirds every day ever since. And it's been 4 years. And so hummingbirds were kind of the thing. So we did a kind of a little bit of a fundraiser type thing where we created shirts, and my husband created a logo, and it has like love and peace and courage and perseverance and hope all on them. And so we made shirts that had all of those different labels on them and sold them and raised money for the TBC1D24 Foundation. And so that kind of took a lot of our energy, or gave us something to do and to work on. And then that kind of petered out because life started up again and we all had to go back to work. And but yeah, that was kind of how we dealt with it at the time.
Did you ever go to any therapies since then? Because you said it's been 4 years now. So
yeah, I actually didn't go to therapy until my dad died. So my dad died in 2022. Okay. Or no, 2023. So the beginning of last year.
Sorry about that too.
Yeah, you have a lot of loss in your life. Jeez.
And how long ago did your siblings die?
2015. They both
15.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been 9 years.
And then Sammy was 2020.
2020. Mm-hmm.
And then your dad in 2022.
2023. Yeah.
2023.
Yeah. So
sorry.
I messed that one up. But yeah, so that's been too many in too short amount of time that are really, really close to me.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until after my dad died that I was like, so when my brother died, I really fell into a depression. And I was like really deep, dark into it. My sister passed away 6 months later, and my grief kind of stopped completely. Like I was numb. Like it was really hard to, I just had a baby, but I could not process anything anymore. I remember when the new year came, I was like scared because it was like I was leaving them.
And you had just had Sammy.
I had actually just had June, so he hadn't been born yet.
Okay.
And June's my second.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good. And so I just was like in a really numb, like, I can't even move forward with my grief. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then the next spring is when Sam lost his job. And then we were kind of like not homeless. Like we had a place to go, but there was no place that was ours. So it was really hard then too. And I think that kickstarted my grief again. Like I can finally feel again. Not that I wasn't feeling, but it was like I can work through the fact that I lost my brother and my sister. And then we got into a really, really good place, like spiritually and financially. We just kind of like got in a really good place. And then that's when we got pregnant with Sammy. We just bought our new home, and I remember having really, really bad anxiety though about like I'm going to have a miscarriage. Like I'm not going to, like something bad is going to happen. Like it doesn't feel good. Something bad is coming. And it felt like it had to do with my birth or with the baby. And then I ended up getting polyhydramnios, which is too much amniotic fluid, but not really that much. Like I was like barely polyhydramnios. So there was like enough that they needed to monitor me, but not enough that they were going to do anything about it. Like I was fine. Like he was safe. And so then I was like, okay, I thought it was that, but it's not that. So then maybe something's happening at the birth. Then his birth went great and he was fine. He had that weird scream, but we didn't know what it was at the time. So then I was like, oh. So then when it became the epilepsy, I was like, okay, that was the thing that I knew was coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like that was it. Like we can handle this. It's just a medical, like people have epilepsy all the time. It's normal. They survive. Seizures are scary. But then I was constantly scared of SUDEP, which is sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, when kids could just die while they're sleeping because of a seizure. And so I was kind of scared of that, especially since the other kids who had passed away with the disorder were like, they weren't able to get up. Like they weren't making that progress. Like they were more developmentally delayed. And so I kind of was thinking like, okay, he'll be fine. Like we're not going to have to worry about that part of it. And so then it was kind of like frustrating that he died because he choked on a pancake, right? Like he already had a disorder that could have taken him, but it had to be this sudden and unexpected way. But because I had already been working through my grief just by spiritually like taking care of myself that way, I was in a better position, I think, for when he passed away to be able to be like, okay, we are going to make sure that we are feeling all of the things when they come. When we're sad, we're just going to feel it. We're not going to run from it. We're not going to hide from it. We're going to make sure that we are feeling it because I don't want to be stunted like I was before.
Yeah.
And then my dad passed away and that was also very sudden and unexpected. And we were angry at that point. Like, God, why? Why are you doing that to us? And then that's when somebody reached out to my sister and said, hey, I heard your dad just died. We're holding a grief group in Levine if you want to come. And so I started going to grief group and I still go to it. I've been doing that for a year.
You find it helpful then? Since it's been a year that you've been going?
Yeah, it's helpful because I finally found, like, my whole family has been through all the same grief that I have, right? But for some reason, going with other people who I didn't know and hearing their stories and their experiences. And like you said, I'm not alone. We're not doing this alone. Some of them have lost children. Some of them have lost their spouses. Some of them lost their parents. So it's not like specific to losing children. And so it's, the program is called Grief Share and it's a Christian based program. And the Crosswalk Church is the one who hosts it in Levine. And so they have a set of videos and a workbook and like you can do as much or as little as you want. You sit and watch the videos and then we talk about all the different, there's like, it talks about.
Is it like 10 people, 20 people?
I think we get up to 20.
Okay.
Up to 20 people. Sometimes is more than others. Sometimes people come and then they don't come back again. And, but we've got a pretty good like core group that goes every time.
Good. Do they offer anything like that for kids, like your daughters?
They don't, not at the school right now. I really, or not at that church right now. I think I really would like for them to be in something like that because there's not really a lot of
one thing that we
options.
go to is it's called Billy's Place.
Okay.
And that's actually set up where they have grief groups, if you will, but specifically for age groups.
Okay.
Like under 6, and then there's like a 6 to 9 or something, and then like 10, 12, whatever, and then teens.
I've heard of Billy's group actually.
And then the parents also go in their own group. So then the kids are actually separated with other siblings or other children that have also potentially lost a sibling or lost a parent or something, right? So
that's awesome. That's definitely something.
I think it's helpful for our kids.
They like going.
I want them because that's the thing where it's like they don't want to talk about it with their friends, obviously, which is fine, but they're not always talking about it with us either. And so then I'm like, they need some type of outlet because I don't want them to be like not broken, but I don't want them to grow up and not have it not resolved, but not like worked through. So I'll definitely look into that.
It's actually really close to where we live.
Yeah.
It's kind of far away from you.
Yeah. But it's like, there's nothing's close to living. So we'll find something. Is there just the one place or are there different?
I'm sure there's more.
There's other ones. Even
I don't know where they're at. Though.
Even they gave us a packet when we left the hospital that had a bunch of different resources in there of
I never
different
looked
places
through my
for the
packet.
siblings.
I'm sure there was something in there.
They explained all of it, and honestly, I didn't look through it. But they explained, they're like, here's this packet. And I remember them explaining things to me. And I was like, okay, that seems like a good idea.
Nice.
But at the time, I was like,
I was like,
my head's not in the space of.
I have all the folders and stuff like tucked away. And I'm like, I'm sure I have information about that somewhere, but that means I have to pull it out and look at it.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can, but not usually. But
I do want to actually go back a little bit to you. There's a phrase that you've used multiple times. And you talked about a crash, like when a crash comes.
Oh, yeah.
Can you take us through some of those crashes, right? Because you said that like right after Sammy died, you kind of, you were in a good enough place that you could spiritually look with your eyes and see the blessings of your cousin that built the casket. And you had friends in your community that came and put up notes, at the funeral and that Sammy died in a way that they were able to still use his heart. They were able to give us something else. So you see all these kind of things, and you said it a couple of times, and but it wasn't until after that, then the big crash came. Can you explain what that big crash was? And then any of the subsequent crashes that happened after that?
I struggle with depression in general. And not like there's not one thing that pinpoints what's causing my depression. It's just that I have depression. And so with my depression, a crash for me is I cannot function. I can't get up. I can't go. I can't do anything. And so with my grief, the depression comes more often, more frequently, and more. And then in the cycles, right? Like sometimes it's because the anniversary date is coming up, but it is really like I can get up and do things, but my body does not want to.
Yeah.
And so I am literally in a place of like my brain gets fuzzy, my body is sore and achy, and I just don't want to get out of bed. I just want to sleep all the time, which is not an option when you have young kids. And so, yeah, those are my crashes, like the crash is coming. And so often I can tell when the crash is coming and I can prepare, right? Like,
and what do you do to prepare?
I find places for my kids to go, or I just let my husband know that the crash is coming. So we're all just kind of like that day, there's no expectations from me. And so then I can have that day. And that's what's changed about my grief this time is that I'm letting myself have that day. Like my body wants to crash instead of just pretending like it's not going to or avoiding it. I'm going to let it crash so that way tomorrow I can wake up and get up.
Do you feel like I can't speak. Do your crashes last usually like just a day then?
Or do you make them last a day?
I kind of make them last a day. Like they could last
limit
longer.
them
I
for a
limit
day.
them. And because I have the grief group, it kind of like gives me an opportunity to let things out more often. So the crashes are not coming. And it's also been 4 years, right? And so the crashes are less anyway, just as the nature of grief happens. Like they're still there, but they're not as often. But it's also because we're preparing ourselves for them. I am going to grief group intentionally so I can get my emotions out to kind of hold me over until the next time I go to grief group and the next time I go to grief group. So then when his birthday comes, that day doesn't have to be a crash day. Even though it wants to be, I can crash after, or I can like just kind of hold my way through it.
How often do you go to grief group?
It goes kind of with the school year. So it'll start in September and then it ends in May, I think. And it's every other week.
Every other week.
And then it's hard because it's also our youth groups happen on Wednesday nights. And then that happens on Wednesday nights. And my husband's church is also on Wednesday nights. And so it's like
going on that
the
day.
busiest day. And so then I'm like, take these kids with you to church so I can go to my grief group, please.
Yeah.
So, but we do make it a priority for me to go to that because my husband has even noticed that has made a change in the way that I can function. Cause the depression, like even like after my sister died, like I was numb, but I was not functional. Like I was unhappy. I was playing with my kids. Like they didn't see me as unhappy, but I really was not feeling any joy during that time. And so like we were really trying hard for me to not get to that place again and just preparing our lives around when my crashes might come. And they're cyclical, right? Like sometimes it'll come without me knowing that it's going to come. And then sometimes it'll actually, so I had one happen recently that I was not expecting. And I heard it talked about in one of your podcasts actually, which is probably why it came fresh into my brain. It didn't cause the crash, but a conversation I had with my sister later did, talking about the investigation into Sammy's death, right? They had to interview me. They had to go home to my house and do a walkthrough of my house and all of that stuff. And that lays a level of guilt on top of me that I already have, right? Like my son choked because I chose to make him pancakes that day, right? Like it was like that type of a thing. I know it's not my fault, but I still have that layer of mom guilt. Like it could have been prevented. And so in their investigation, they did find neglect on my part. And so because of that, it caused me to, anyway, I have this anxiety about, I'm a helicopter mom 100% now and with other people's kids. So I was trying to have my sister come over and bring her kids to go swimming. And she was like, going to drop them off and leave. And I was like, you can't leave me here with all these kids. Like I need another adult. So that way I'm not the only one watching them. And she was like she's like, but they're all 14. They can be in the pool by themselves. They can take care of themselves. You don't even have to watch them. And I was like, that's not the point. I have this anxiety of it being my fault.
Yeah.
And she hadn't known that. And so I had to explain it to her. And then the next day I crashed because I had been fine with it, right? I had made peace with it, that I know that it's not my fault. Even the person who came and told us, he was like, neglect was found, but you need to appeal it. Like it was that kind of thing. Like he knew it wasn't my fault. Like nobody was blaming me. But just to have to share it with her caused me to crash. And so that was a crash that I was not prepared for. And so then I was like, and it just like fuzzy brain. So we really do try to make it to where on the date of his death, or even on the date of, him going into the hospital, we just try to prepare me for that day and prepare my husband too. Like, but mine is a little bit more physically affected than his is. So we just really try to get ahead of it before it gets us. And the grief group really has helped with that.
Good.
Yeah. I should have done it way sooner.
That's good you found it.
Yeah, I just didn't know it was an option. So.
And have you tried any other forms of therapy, or is that the only thing that you've kind of tried or gone to? That's
the only one. I've been better about scripture study just in general. Like, in that way, my husband and I have been better with making sure we're praying together and with our family and making that more of a priority. It's hard when you have two different religions. It's both Christian, but it's not, it doesn't quite line up the same way. And so that kind of can be tricky. And so we've just figured out a way to navigate that to where like Christ is the center. Yeah. And because Christ is the center for both of us, we can do these things that are worship and that are allowing him and his spirit into our home to support us and to lift us and carry us. So that has been mostly what we've done. And I did start going to therapy more for the anxiety than for the grief, but that kind of helps another place for me to go and just like a focused time to let everything out. Yeah.
And has that been, you looked up one therapist, was able to go to them and have a good connection with them, or have you had to
so I actually
multiple therapists?
Had one. It was just a one. It was kind of funny because he's like old, and he kind of reminded me of my dad, which is I think why it was like a good click. But he's leaving, he's moving, and so he's like, I think you're gonna match really well with this person. So I'm having that new anxiety of like, I have to start over. Yeah. But because he thinks that I'll be okay, I'm sure that I will be okay. Yeah. So hopefully it'll be okay. I haven't met with her yet, but it's set up and scheduled, so I don't have to worry about it. It's gonna be okay, I think. But again, that's mostly for the anxiety. And then my personal doctor is the one who gave me the referral over to that office, and it's been pretty good for me ever since, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Earlier in your whole story describing Sammy in the hospital and everything, you had said, I'm trying to remember exactly what you were talking about. Like you knew that day was the day or whatever, but you were going to come back to it.
Oh yeah. I knew that he was I knew that he was gone.
Yes.
And then I found out, like, I understand now why I knew he was gone. It's because that miracle, I knew the miracle was coming, but it wasn't for us. Donating. Okay. Yeah. Being able to donate his heart. Like, right. It I don't know. It like lined
the
up.
Timing had to work perfectly for that to happen.
Yeah. Okay. And that kind of gives like acceptance, right? Like I'm accepting that this is happening because it needed to in order for that family to receive their miracle. Which is like like you were saying, it's a terrible thing to know that in order for, can you imagine being that other family where in order for their baby to live, another baby has to die? Like that would probably be the worst feeling because the miracle that you're praying for, like it would.
Part of me thinks that even like the other family wouldn't necessarily think that. They would just be like, wow, this heart was amazing. and they don't ever think of the
Right.
tragedy that was affixed to it. Because at least I never would have. You know what I mean?
I don't know.
I don't know
But
either.
Like I would have just been like, oh yeah, wow.
Wow, here's a heart ready
Here's
to
a
go.
heart, or here's like the eyes
So
or whatever.
my-
and I wouldn't think of it that way.
My sister was just telling me a story of a family friend that we knew who had parts of the eye, or I don't know how it works, donated to her to restore her vision. But those were given from a toddler that was the same age as my brother way back whenever it happened. And so she had a special connection to that baby because of that, like where those eyes came from. And so I think I feel
Okay.
like maybe that kind of a connection might be there. They haven't reached out or anything. And I know that it's possible that they can.
Yeah.
And I hope that someday they will. Even if, and I also know that sometimes the heart doesn't take, right? Like sometimes when you do an organ transplant, it gets
It doesn't
rejected.
always work. Yeah.
And so we don't know what happened after.
of course.
And so it might be still a tragedy for them.
yeah.
But I hope that it worked, and I hope that his heart is still beating out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And that the miracle was able to stick. It's really is kind of, and if it didn't, then I don't know, my acceptance might go away, but it's like right now I kind of can move forward because of that idea.
Yeah. You've talked about it a little bit with just how you parent a little bit now. Did the death of Sammy adjust or shift how you parent your children? And if so, how?
Yeah, I am a lot more chill. Like I'm a helicopter mom, of course. Like I'm very much you can't get in the pool unless we're here. You can't do this. You can't do that. My husband is more helicopter than I am, but like my poor kids are very, very overprotected. But I'm also less, I nag my children a lot, but I'm not as rough in my discipline, I guess is what it is. I feel like I'm a lot more gentle and a lot more, I allow things to happen. I'm not like
You
letting
allow
them.
more mistakes, and
I allow more mistakes. I'm letting them be.
If something happens, it's not
mistakes.
as big as what
Exactly.
it would be
We talk-
before.
We talk about it. We point it out, but it doesn't change my mood.
Yeah.
Because I don't want them to feel like I'm mad at them, and I don't want them to feel like I don't love and appreciate them. Not that Sammy ever felt like I didn't, but I want them to know that I'm in their corner. I'm here. I'm gonna,
And it's okay.
and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. We can make mistakes. I feel like that's the only thing that's changed. I think I would have changed that direction anyway, but it's kind of how it has changed since then.
It's interesting how quickly that happens, though. It's as if somebody hands you a pair of glasses and you throw on, and the glasses show what's important and what's not important.
Yes.
And yeah, so things I used to think were important and would drive me nuts, I'm honestly like, okay, that sucks that this thing happened, but it's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal, and it does not change my because and for kids, like just in general, like when you have big reactions, they take it personal, because I have had that experience, right? When the adults have the big reactions and we take it personal, like it's our fault, like we're the one who's wrong. And so trying to show them that it's the situation sucks, but they don't suck, right? Like you're still really cool and I still really like you, but I don't like this thing that's happening over here.
Yeah.
And we can change that, right? But it's not changing my love is not being changed in any way. And so then I'm more aware of how my love might come across. Just to try to help a little bit, because again, they're not getting counseling right now, right? Like who knows what kind of battles they're having in their mind. And I don't want to make that harder for them.
Yeah.
I don't know, just trying to be that safe place.
And then, so now that we know how it switched or changed or adjusted your parenting style, what about your relationship with your husband? How did it shift or change your guys' relationship?
So it's stronger now than it ever was before. We struggled a lot after my sister passed away and after he lost his job. Like we just had like a really, really dark, like, are we going to do this or not? And we both decided, yes, we were. And it almost was like, because we decided, yes, we were, the Sammy thing was almost like the test for
Like
it.
you chose this.
Yeah. Like,
you really
are you
right
going to do it?
afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then we're like, are we going to do it? And yes, we are. And so now, and the same as how we treat our children, we're treating each other in that same way.
Giving each other grace.
Because he's lost his son.
Yeah.
Right? Like his boy, girls are great. We love our girls. We don't get to raise our son.
Yeah.
And that's something that he struggles with. Not that like we want to be like, okay, let's have more babies so we can have finally get our son, right? Like he wanted his son. He doesn't get to have him. So I'm constantly aware of that hardship that he has to go through. And then he does the same for me. So we're more empathetic towards each other, more patience, more willingness to work it out. And that's been, so yeah, we're stronger than ever. Another blessing, I guess, that came from it.
Do you feel like any relationships with any of your other family members or friends change in a good way or bad way?
So my family is all very, very close. And they, because they've had all the same griefs that I had, right? Like my siblings lost their siblings.
Mm-hmm.
They lost their dad. In my case, I lost my son, but they lost their nephew. And it's not the same. And they never tried to make it the same, but they are my support because they get it. Like they know.
Yeah.
They're not going to judge me when I can't get out of bed. They're going to come and take my kids for me so I can't get out of bed, to allow me to stay in bed. So my siblings were all really close that way because of that. My friends, I was telling you about that group of friends. We actually weren't a group before Sammy. They were kind of like starting a little bit of a group, and then Sammy passed away, and then they like swooped me in. And so we would do like weekly video calls. Every Wednesday night we'd call, and they included me in that. And so it kind of like gave me a support group because they were already like, they just like swooped me in. I have
on that specific one, because there's two ways that you could look at that and be like, you're only friends with me now because this thing happened with Sammy. I
have mentioned that to one of them actually.
Okay.
And she was like, we actually weren't really a group until after Sammy. All of us became a group because of Sammy, because they loved him too. Like we were all friends at church. Like they all got to see him. It was all just like friendly, but we became our crew after Sammy. And it was almost like he solidified our like, yes, they came to rescue me, but they came to rescue me because it was me and not because Sammy died, but because they loved Sammy too.
Yeah.
And they wanted to rescue me at that point.
Yeah.
So I had brought it up because I was like, sometimes I feel like you are like you guys like you adopted me.
Yeah.
And she was like, we weren't even a group until after Sammy. She's like, they did one baking night.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't bake, so that's why I wasn't included in it. But they did one baking night, and then we do book clubs for our kids. It became this really solid group after.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it. It was a good call on whoever made that decision. I appreciate them. I do have, I have some longtime friends who, slowly stepped away on
They
their
didn't
own.
know how to deal with it.
I have one who actually blatantly said, I don't know how to help you, so I'm stepping away, which was hurtful. And I'm like, you could have just quietly left. You did not have to tell me that it was hard for you. I'm so sorry that my loss was hard for you. And then I have one of my best friends from high school. She has been experiencing recurrent pregnancy loss. And so she had a stillbirth. And so we are closer now because we both are having this shared experience, because she struggles even when people get pregnant and they can have a baby, and I have babies, but she has no problem with my babies because she understands that I understand her.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, it's made us closer that way. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a roller coaster. It's wild.
So you were able to find good things, but the people that maybe wouldn't have been as helpful to you kind of just went away.
Yeah, they kind of just excused themselves. And I get it. And it does make it hard because these are friends that I thought I was going to be friends with forever. And so then it's like awkward because it's like, I would still like to be your friend, but how do I reach out to you after you've kind of left me? Like, I don't know. And, when we become adults anyway, everybody goes off and does their own things, or we don't need, I don't know. It's just kind of like.
Everybody has their life.
Yeah.
And it's.
And
our
for the ones
aren't always so intertwined.
Right. And for the ones who just quietly stepped away, it would be easier to like.
Hey, haven't talked to you in a while.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
but where the one is like.
I'm out.
Yeah. Like, how do I bridge that gap? Because I'm not interested in losing any of my friends, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would love to repair all of that, but I can't be the one to reach out because you hurt me.
Yeah.
So that might be a pride thing that I'm a little stuck with.
Yeah.
It's okay. I'll deal with it for now.
One other thing that came up in all of this, the story, because of COVID, you said that you were in the hospital by yourself for like a week-ish or something, or a couple days. Can we dig into that for just a second? Because that seems like that would be very, very difficult. Because your support, especially from a marriage standpoint, if you go back to what you talked about, where you were kind of in your dark period, you said, yes, we're doing this. You're going to be my stronghold. I'm going to be your stronghold. And then because of the circumstances, you're separated. And so then you're almost left out to dry, for lack of better terms to say it, just there by yourself. Like, how isolated was that?
The worst. 100%, it was the worst experience. What I ended up doing was, because Sam was so positive that the miracle was going to happen, I was just like riding on that faith and not letting myself like fall. So I was working, like I had my computer and like he was sleeping, he was sedated, so I just go into the family room and like record my videos for my students and like post them so they could watch them on Monday, or post them so they could watch them on Tuesday. I didn't do that after Tuesday, but like I was trying to be a person. I watched Tiger King. Like that's the weirdest.
It was just bad. It became super popular.
But it was like
in 2020. Like, I haven't watched it either. But it was like
the weirdest time for me to be the one to watch it, because what else am I supposed to do though? I was like,
trying to distract yourself.
There was nothing else to do. I did that. I had been reading a book or listening to an audiobook. It was called The Winds and the Waves. And the woman in the story, in the past, has a baby that didn't live long after birth or something like that. And then the present day, this baby has a heart condition or whatever. So I had to stop reading that book altogether. So I was like, okay, I don't even have a book to read now because the book that I was reading is too close to home right now.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to The Saints, which just talks about our early church history. So it's just literally like the history of it, which is actually pretty cool. But because in my fiction book, that's what it was along the lines of. It was very easy to just jump in there and then be like with facts. Just need all these facts here. It didn't have to be fun. It was just interesting. So that was kind of a thing I did to keep me busy. I couldn't eat. I had the night nurse that would come in. She was like giving me tea from her own stash, a ginger tea. And she's like, you have to have something. And I was like, oh, I'm fasting. And she's like, you have to have something. Okay, I'll drink tea. And then she'd come in the next day and she'd be like, did you eat? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, did you eat 3 meals today? And I was like, no. And she's like, you have to eat. So she was like being my nurse pretty much, because I was not
worried about you too,
able to take care of myself, because I just wasn't hungry. I couldn't.
So then when Sam came back and was able to come back,
then
that like an amazing experience?
That's when I finally was like broken. Like I often wonder what the nurses thought about me beforehand, because I was so like,
you were trying to hold it together.
And then as soon as Sam got there, then I was like, and I was like sobbing all the time. But we also like, the reason that Sam was there was because they were pretty much telling us we're not going to be able to take our baby home.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, I wonder if they are taking it as insincere, which is a silly thing to worry about. But that's what I was concerned about, but I was like, I mean, like they moved him over so I can sleep with him. I hadn't done that all week long. I hadn't held him since the Friday before.
Wow.
And so like, I was like, thank you for letting me finally do this. I didn't know it was an option. I didn't know I could crawl in bed with him. So it was much better. It was really, really hard for Sam because he doesn't like hospitals in general. Like he does not like to go, like when I have babies, like he'll come with me because he's supporting me, but he does not like to be at the hospital. He doesn't like the medical trauma that everybody has to go through. So he struggled a lot with that part of it, having to be at the hospital.
Yeah.
It was really hard because he had stuff in his face.
Yeah.
So we didn't even really get a good look at his sweet little body because we decided to do organ donation. They kept him connected to the machines as we left. So that was hard, but it was easier to do because we were together. I'm not sure how I would have handled that without him. And then walking out of the hospital, I think he was literally holding me up because I was going to fall down. And the sun was too bright. Yeah.
I'm glad you guys were able to be together.
Me too. Me too. And it sucks because it's good because the girls didn't have to see him all hooked up to machines. But it sucks because the last time they saw him, the firefighters were working on him.
Oh, yeah. That's our last memory.
It's kind of traumatic for everybody. And we didn't really get that peaceful, anyway. And then the funeral was beautiful. And the mortuary did a great job with him. And he looked not like himself, but enough like himself.
That's always how it goes.
And I remember, because he was still hooked up to the machines at the hospital, he was very warm. And so when I touched him at the viewing, it was way too cold. It was like shocking. And so that's where I was kind of like, I probably should have stayed at the hospital so I could have had a little bit more preparation of his spirit is gone from his body. Because I don't know how that works, right? Like, is the spirit attached to the heart beating? Is the spirit attached to the brain? Is the spirit, like, at what point was my son no longer in his body anymore?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like a hard, like a shocking realization, like, oh, he's really not here.
Yeah.
It's really hard because you can see them, and even almost physically, they don't look like who they were.
Yeah. Yeah. Already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
So it's been 4 years.
Yeah.
So 2 questions on the 4 years then. What's been the hardest time in those 4 years, and what's been a miracle or amazing? I don't know, choose something that's been amazing in the last 4 years. So what's been the hardest time, and what's something that's been amazing in the last 4 years?
So the hardest time was probably that first year, hitting every date, everything that we missed, his birthday, his whatever, there's a kid that lives down our street who's very close in age. So getting to watch him grow up and not having my boy get to grow up has been really, really hard. A miracle is we had my daughter, my rainbow baby. Her name is Rainy. And she brought a very similar sunshine, like my Sammy. We always refer to him as just pure sunshine because that's really what he was. And she brought his face. She looks just like him. And so that was kind of a blessing, but she's her own person. So it's not like hurt. It doesn't hurt. So that's been kind of a wonderful thing that happened. But that was also stressful because we carry a genetic mutation. And so we had to do like genetic testing before she was born. And that was traumatic. So we're going to have any more children because there's 25% chance that any child we have will have the disorder.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And so we have our 1 in 4, our Sammy. So I don't want to
risk that again.
not because he wasn't sweet and perfect and we would do that all over again, but what a life to live, to be in the emergency room every other week, or to not have control over your body.
Yeah.
To want to get something on your own and your body gives up on you. Like I have a video of him where he climbed himself up onto to standing. And so he's trying to get something off of the couch. And so he's like cruising along, and I'm recording it because he wasn't doing that before. And then his legs give out and he falls.
Oh, wow.
And then he lays, and he's got this pouty face because he fell. But then he sees me and he brightens up and he comes and crawls in his funny little wobbly crawl. But how can you, I don't know. I'm not sad for him. I'm sad for me because he had a hard life and now he doesn't have to do it anymore. And I don't know. I have this really strong belief of his spirit is perfect. He did not have to be tried the same way that we have to be tried in this life. And he automatically gets a spot in heaven because he's perfect already. I also have a very strong belief that, which the saints actually, when I was listening to that book, kind of like reaffirmed for me, that when we are resurrected, I will be able to raise my son. And if that's not true, oh well, I'm going to believe on it anyway because it makes me feel hope. And I will stick with it.
You have to have hope in this life.
Yeah. Yeah, because what else? What are we doing here if we're not looking forward to where we're going? So that's my testimony there, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us or the audience or anything?
No, I don't know.
You're good. Thanks so much for coming today.
Yeah.
I
Thank
really
you very much
appreciate
for coming and for sharing Sammy's story with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.